I stood on my parents' porch with 3 kids behind me and a garbage bag at my feet. I knocked on that door the way I had 1,000 times before, my mother's house, my father's door, and they closed it in front of my children. My brother laughed. My sister lectured me. And I stood there on those steps and made myself one promise. 3 words. Watch what happens. Here's what happened. My name is Coralie, and 18 months ago, I had what most people would call a decent life. Not perfect. Not the kind you post online and get 1,000 comments telling you it's goals. Just decent. Stable. A house with a dishwasher that actually worked. A minivan with a cracked taillight I kept meaning to fix. And 3 kids growing so fast that if I blinked at the wrong moment, I felt like I'd miss an entire year of them. Sarin was 9, serious, careful, the kind of kid who reads the instructions before she opens the box. Keller was 6, loud, wild, absolutely convinced that if she believed hard enough, she could fly. And Arlo was 4, still small enough to fall asleep in my arms. Still young enough to think I could fix anything in the world. And then there was Caspian. My husband. 10 years married. Long enough that I'd stopped remembering who I was before him, which is something nobody warns you about. How slowly a marriage can hollow you out without you ever noticing it's happening. He wasn't a monster. That would have almost been easier. Monsters are obvious. You can point at them. Caspian was something harder to name. Charming, inconsistent, allergic to accountability. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Somehow, whatever went wrong always ended up being quietly, definitively my fault. The cracks had been there for years. I'd just gotten very good at patching them. I worked part-time as a medical records coordinator, nothing glamorous, but steady. I ran the house. The school schedules, the grocery lists, the pediatric appointments, the permission slips, the birthday parties, the 2 a.m. nightmares. Caspian ran his career like it was a religion. Sales director at a logistics company, good money, long hours, constant travel. And somewhere in all those business trips, he found someone else. I didn't find out through some dramatic confrontation. I found out the way a lot of women find out, an accidental text on a phone he'd left unlocked on the kitchen counter. 3 sentences. That's all it took. 3 sentences. And 10 years evaporated in about 45 seconds. I'm not going to walk you through what those next few weeks looked like. Some pain is too specific to hand to strangers. What I'll tell you is that we tried, briefly, to hold it together, and it didn't work. Caspian said all the right things, he always knew the right things to say, but something in me had already shifted, and his words just passed through me like wind through a screen door. By spring, I had filed for divorce. What I didn't see coming, what I genuinely, naively did not anticipate, was what would happen when I told my family. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. What do you think a mother of 3, blindsided by betrayal, has any right to expect from her own parents? Keep that answer in your head. You're going to need it in about 2 minutes, because it is not what she got. I come from what I believed was a close family. My parents, Lavette and Bowen, had been married 36 years, the kind of parents who showed up to every graduation, every recital, who called on birthdays without being reminded. My brother Landis was 32, unmarried, still living in the house he grew up in, half of it converted into a gaming setup he never had to pay $1 toward. My sister Bree was 28, newly married, and, after 18 whole months of matrimony, apparently in possession of a PhD in exactly what makes a marriage work or fail. I called my mother first. I told her everything, what Caspian had done, that I was filing, that I didn't know yet what custody would look like, but that I needed a few weeks. Just a little room to breathe. Maybe the guest room, while I got my footing. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that has an entire paragraph folded inside it. Corey, my mother said, you know we don't have the space. I need you to understand something. My parents' house has 4 bedrooms. Landis had 1. The other 2 sat empty, gathering dust. There was a finished basement, a pull-out couch, a television, its own bathroom. I had slept in that basement every Thanksgiving for a decade when the holiday ran long. There was space. There was more than enough space. Mom, I said carefully, I have 3 kids. I just need a few weeks. You need to think about this more carefully, she said. Divorce is a serious step, Coralie. Caspian is a provider. These things happen in marriages. You work through them. He had cheated. I had the proof in my hand. I hadn't misread a single part of this. And somehow, I was the one being asked to reconsider. The next morning I drove over anyway. Pulled into the driveway I'd pulled into 1,000 times. Walked up the porch steps I used to run up as a kid. Knocked on the door of my own parents' house. My father answered. Bowen was not a cold man, or he never used to be. But when he saw me and the kid standing behind me, his face did something complicated. Rehearsed. Almost. Like he'd already been briefed and had his line ready. Your mother and I talked, he said. We don't think it's a good idea, you staying here. Dad. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. I have nowhere to go right now. What about the house? I don't know yet what's happening with the house. The lawyer says it could take months. You could go back, he said. Try again. Sarin was standing right behind me. 9 years old. Completely silent. I felt her small hand slide into mine, and I held onto it so tight my knuckles went white. I'm not going back, I said. I need help. I'm asking you for help. He looked at me for a long moment. Then his eyes moved past me, to the kids. Then he stepped back, just slightly, and said, I'm sorry, Coralie. We just can't do it right now. And he started to close the door. That's when Landis appeared, slipping around our father's shoulder before it shut all the way. My 32-year-old brother, living rent-free in our parents' house, with a half-smile on his face, said, There literally is no space, Cor. You know how it is. He had an entire floor to himself. I stood on that porch and I did not cry. God, I wanted to, the feeling was right there, pressing at the back of my throat like a fist. But Sarin was holding my hand, and Keller had pressed herself against my leg, and Arlo had wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. Because at 4 years old he could feel that something was wrong, even without understanding what. I was not going to fall apart in front of them. Not on that porch. Not ever, if I could help it. Okay, I said. Just that. Okay. Then Bree appeared, of course she did, materializing in the hallway like she'd been waiting for her cue this entire time. Arms crossed. Head tilted in that particular way she has right before she says something she's already decided is wise. Honestly, Corey, she said, I think this whole thing is a little impulsive. Caspian isn't a bad person. People make mistakes. You have 3 kids to think about. Their stability matters more than your feelings right now. Their stability. As if I hadn't been the one building every single piece of that stability, brick by brick, for the entirety of their lives. As if I hadn't been the one at every pickup, every fever, every nightmare, every first day of school and last day of school and every hard, forgettable Tuesday in between. Thank you for your input, I said. My voice came out very, very even. Bree just shrugged, like I was the one being difficult here. I picked the garbage bag up off the porch. I buckled 3 kids into a minivan with a cracked tail light, and I drove away from the house I grew up in. We spent that first night in a motel 30 minutes outside of town. It cost more than I wanted it to, but the room was clean, it had 2 beds, and the kids thought the whole thing was an adventure. Sarin helped me get Arlo settled. Keller announced she'd be sleeping in the middle because she was, in her words, the important one. And I lay awake that night, alone for the first time in what felt like years, feeling small and shaky and rattled to my core. I thought about everything I'd lost. And then I made myself think, instead, about what I still had. A part-time job I could probably turn full-time if I asked. A decent work history. A lawyer willing to take my case on a payment plan. 3 children, healthy, whole, currently asleep in a pile like puppies. And a promise I'd whispered to myself on a porch. Watch what happens. I'm going to skip past the ugly middle stretch. Not because it wasn't real, it was very real, but because this story was never really about the suffering. There was a month in that motel that stretched longer than it should have. There was a week of eating crackers for dinner because the last of my cash had gone toward new shoes for Arlo, whose feet had outgrown the old ones overnight. There were nights I sat on the edge of a bathtub after the kids were asleep and let myself feel the entire weight of what had happened, all at once. And then I stood up, washed my face, and went back to being their mother. What I actually want to tell you about is what I built instead. My supervisor at the medical records office, a woman named Tell, sharp, no nonsense, unexpectedly kind, noticed I'd started coming in early and staying late. One afternoon she asked me straight out if I was going through something hard. I said yes. She didn't offer me pity. She offered me hours, full time, with benefits. I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't fancy but was safe, close to Sarin and Keller's school, with a bus stop 2 blocks from Arlo's daycare. It was small, one drawer in the kitchen that actually opened right, bathroom tile in a shade of beige that had probably been stylish sometime around 1987. But it was ours. I hung curtains that first weekend, bright yellow, aggressively cheerful, picked out by Keller herself, and I stood back and looked at them and thought, okay, this is going to be all right. Now here's where it gets good. Because everything you've heard so far is just the setup. What happens over the next 8 months is where the ground actually shifts, and where the people who slammed that door start finding out exactly what they threw away. The divorce took 8 months. Caspian had the better lawyer, at least at first, and he used it, pushing for a custody arrangement that was, generously speaking, optimistic about how present he actually intended to be in his kids' lives. But here's the thing about a father who hasn't been doing the work. He doesn't have the receipts. I had 10 years of being the primary parent, and every bit of it was documented. School records, medical records, daycare check-in logs, all of it with my name and my signature. My attorney was thorough. The custody evaluation was not kind to Caspian's version of events. I walked away with primary physical custody. He got every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. Along with 8 months of retroactive child support his new legal team tried very creatively to shrink. It didn't work. My family found out about the settlement through the grapevine. Our town isn't big, and news travels faster than it should. My mother called. First time she'd called since the night I told her about the divorce in the first place. We're so relieved it worked out, she said. Like she'd been watching from a safe, comfortable distance the whole time. Like she'd been in my corner all along. Are you? I said. Coralie, you have to understand. Mom, I said. I do understand. I understood it very clearly that night on the porch, with 3 kids and a garbage bag. I wasn't being hasty. I was asking for help. She shifted into the mode she always shifts into when she feels cornered, the sighing, the gentle suggestion that I was being oversensitive, that families go through hard patches, that we needed to move forward. I let her talk. I didn't argue. When she finished, I told her I needed some time, and that I'd be in touch. I haven't rushed that timeline since. Bree reached out about 4 months after the settlement. Once I'd gotten the kids settled and found something that resembled a rhythm. A long message, paragraphs, actually, about how she'd been reflecting, how she hoped we could reconnect, how some things had come out wrong and she hoped I understood where she'd been coming from. I read it twice. I thought about the porch. I thought about your feelings right now, delivered with that particular tilt of her head. I wrote back something short, not unkind. I appreciated the message. I needed more time. When I was ready, I'd reach out. She hasn't stopped trying since. Messages every few weeks, each one a little more elaborate, each one a little more aware of exactly what she'd miscalculated. I read every one. I take my time. Landis hasn't reached out at all, which, in its own way, is its own kind of answer. My father sent a card at Christmas. Thinking of you, in his handwriting. I put it on the fridge, because it's his handwriting, and my kid's grandfather, and that's a separate thing from everything else that happened on that porch. 6 months after the settlement, Tell recommended me for a department lead position. It came with a raise that made me sit down for a second when I saw the number. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was mine. Earned. Documented. Nobody's grace, nobody's exception. Just mine. I upgraded the apartment, a 3-bedroom in the same school district, a little newer, bathroom tile in a color that had genuinely never been fashionable at any point in recorded history, but every single drawer in the kitchen opened the way it was supposed to. Keller got her own room and immediately covered one wall in chalkboard paint, then covered that wall in horse illustrations she absolutely could not draw but was very committed to anyway. Sarin, who'd stayed quiet and watchful through most of it, came and leaned against the counter one evening while I was cooking. She watched me stir for a while, and then she said, "Mom, I think we're going to be okay." She was 10 by then. "Yeah," I said. "I think so too." She went back to her homework. I kept stirring, and I thought about a porch and a garbage bag, and 3 words I'd whispered to no one at all. There's a specific kind of justice that never announces itself. It doesn't come with a big confrontation, or a moment where you get to watch someone's face fall when they realize how wrong they were. It's quieter than that. It builds in increments. It's a lease with only your name on it. It's a savings account that keeps climbing. It's 3 kids falling asleep in their own beds, in a home you built out of nothing, who wake up the next morning and ask for pancakes, with absolutely no idea how much it cost you to get here, which is exactly how you want it. Caspian moved in with the woman he'd been seeing. That lasted about a year, from what I hear. He's renting a 1-bedroom on the east side of town now. He takes the kids every other weekend, and to his credit, he actually shows up. We communicate by text, and only about the kids. It's efficient. I've stopped waiting for an apology from my parents, or my siblings. Not because I've decided they don't owe me one, they do. But because I learned something in the last 18 months that nobody ever told me before, waiting for an apology is its own way of staying. And I am done staying anywhere I had to beg to be let into. Last month, Sarin School held a family showcase, the kind of event where kids present a project and parents wander around with bad coffee from a folding table, looking at display boards. I went, obviously. I always go. Sarin's project was on resilience. She'd researched it for weeks, the science of it, the psychology, what makes some people recover while others stay buried. She built the whole display board herself, hand-lettered the title herself. And at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, she'd written a line of her own. Not from any source. Just hers. Resilient people don't wait to be rescued. They figure out the next step. She was standing next to it when I walked up, watching me read it with that careful, measured look she's always had. "I wrote that part myself," she said. "Not from a source." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. 10 years old, already understanding something it took me 34 years to learn. "It's good," I said. She nodded, completely satisfied. "I know. I'm not telling you this story so you'll feel sorry for me. I don't want your sympathy. I've got a working dishwasher, a department lead position, and 3 kids who are wildly, loudly, specifically themselves. I'm doing just fine. I'm telling it because I know there are women listening right now who are standing at some version of that door, holding the weight of kids, and bags, and shattered trust, asking for help from people who are supposed to love them, and watching that door swing shut anyway. It feels like the end of something. It isn't. I promise you, it's the beginning. The people who closed that door on me are still living the exact same lives they were living 18 months ago. Same house. Same routines. Same everything. And I built something entirely new out of a motel room, a garbage bag, and 3 words whispered on a porch in the dark. There is no sweeter outcome than that. None. If someone ever told you there was no space for you, what did you do with it? Tell me in the comments, because I believe this community understands something that took me far too long to learn. The people who say there's no room for you are usually just afraid of what you'll become the moment you find your own.